Next on KQED Newsroom, the fallout continues after the explosive FBI sting that led to corruption charges against State Senator Leland Yee and others, some with alleged ties to organized crime. The first female chancellor of UCSF prepares to take the helm of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Plus, a new dance performance explores a social dilemma amid the radical transformation of San Francisco's Bayview Hunters Point.
I think what should happen for that area is that the residents of Bayview Hunters Point have a voice in how their neighborhood is being developed.
Good evening and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. The allegations against State Senator Leland Yee of San Francisco and others have generated enough drama for the popular Netflix series House of Cards. Today, in an unprecedented move, the state Senate suspended Yee, along with two other Democratic senators embroiled in scandal. Yee was arrested Wednesday along with suspected Chinatown gang figure Raymond Shrimp Boy Chow, seen here on his Facebook page. The FBI probed and snared more than 24 people. At the center of the charges, multiple crimes, including bribery, drug distribution, arms trafficking, even murder for hire. Shockwaves are rippling throughout California. Joining me now for the latest developments are Nathan Halverson from the Investigative Reporting Program at UC Berkeley, Marisa Lagos, San Francisco Chronicle City Hall reporter, and Scott Detrow, KQED Sacramento Bureau Chief, joining us from the state capitol. Scott, let's begin with you. You were at the session today when the suspension decision was made, and now Governor Brown has called for all three senators to resign. What's the mood in Sacramento?
Angry, disgusted, shocked. This is the second time in 2 months that a state senator has been caught allegedly taking bribes from FBI agents. In the Senate history in California, no member has been suspended, and today 3 different lawmakers suspended by their colleagues, not allowed to come back to the Senate, leaders say, until they're either cleared of their charges. Leland Yee, I think, takes this to a whole different level. The conversation all year has been about one corruption issue or another, whether it was Ron Calderon caught allegedly taking bribes from FBI agents, or Roderick Wright, another Southern California lawmaker who was convicted for lying about living outside of his district. But when the Yee charges came out and you have evidence of allegedly gun running, talking about bringing assault weapons from the Philippines for coming from a guy who had been pushing very hard for gun control, I think that takes the shock of the charges to a whole different level here.
Marisa, what do we know about how all this transpired? I mean, it basically started, let's connect the dots a little bit for the folks at home. It all started with Raymond Shrimp Boy Chow. He introduced undercover FBI agents to Keith Jackson, who is a political consultant and who used to be head of the school board here in San Francisco, who's also a close friend of Leland Yee. Yeah. And then Keith Jackson, you take the story from there.
So yeah, Keith Jackson kind of came into the picture, it seems like, with Leland around 2011 when the senator was running for mayor here in San Francisco, and kind of came on as a fundraiser consultant. It's not quite clear exactly how they kind of hooked up, but essentially Jackson started getting close to Chow and others within this Chinatown tong, and eventually started hitting up these undercover agents for campaign contributions. Essentially, over the next few years, they struck a bunch of deals to make large contributions well above both the city and state's limits in exchange for, in one case, a letter and a phone call in support of some something at the Department of Public Health, some sort of contract, some legislation that was pending, even a proclamation for Shrimp Boys Chinatown Association, which I'm not sure why that would cost $6,800, and sort of culminated as the senator, according to this affidavit, 137 pages that the feds laid out, got sort of more desperate for money and started approaching them about this arms trafficking deal, saying he could get shoulder-fired missiles from the Philippines potentially.
And he was desperate for money because he had campaign debts from his run for San Francisco mayor, and also he was running for Secretary of State. He has now dropped out of that race the day after his arrest.
Well, and that adds a whole nother layer, right? I mean, Scott mentioned the gun stuff. Leland Yee had been an outspoken advocate for gun control measures, including trigger locks and cracking down on semi-automatic weapons. He also was a huge proponent of open government. He was running for Secretary of State, which is the statewide person who oversees elections. So it's interesting. And yes, I mean, what the affidavit says is, yes, essentially that he was desperate to retire this mayoral debt and to raise enough money to become Secretary of State. I don't know that that all adds up in terms of the amount of money. I mean, $70,000 in a mayoral race isn't a ton of money ultimately, but it does seem the picture they paint is of somebody who's increasingly sort of despondent and unhappy and really desperate to make this work. He's been in office since 1988, I believe. So, maybe he was just worried about losing his job.
Well, and he's been one of the most prominent Asian American politicians in the state.
Absolutely.
I mean, he was, the first Chinese American elected to the state Senate. In the Assembly, he was the first Asian American to serve as Speaker pro tem.
And his seat was actually about to be eliminated by redistricting.
Yes, so he needed that Secretary of State job, and I think that might have added to the desperation. I want to ask you, Nathan, because you met, let's turn our attention to Raymond Chow. You met Raymond Chow about a year ago for a documentary project you've been working on with UC Berkeley, and you've continued to follow the Tong, his group in Chinatown. What do we know about him?
Well, there's actually quite a bit of information just because he has been such a notorious figure for so long. He came to the United States when he was 16, didn't speak a lick of English, went to Galileo High School, got into an altercation pretty quickly, got caught up in street gangs in Chinatown rapidly, became an enforcer. In my conversations with him, his first illegal assignment here, if you will, was to do to beat up a union leader of a local Teamster, and that assignment came from a mafia boss. So they paid him, several thousand to go beat up a guy. I mean, Raymond is a martial arts expert, and from that kind of get-go, he remained a very notorious figure, growing higher and higher and more powerful until in the early 90s when he was arrested. He was essentially running a large percentage of Asian organized crime in the United States.
And that's one of the most amazing thing about this case against the senator and these 25 other defendants, 22 of whom were arrested this week, 4 of whom are outstanding. It really reads like something out of Hollywood. I mean, you mentioned House of Cards, and somebody asked me today, well, what happens to these offices while these senators are out? And I joked, haven't you watched House of Cards? I mean, but it's true. I mean, there's gun running, there is coke deals, there are, conversations in dark karaoke bars and whispers and secrets. And I mean, the fact that a state senator got caught up in this is just interesting. And it really speaks to a lot of what people think might happen in these sort of shady organizations, but what nobody knows.
Can I tell you what blows my mind here? They ran 4 years of wiretaps and surveillance on Shrimp Boy, a gangster, and I'm really into gangsters. So I mean, this is interesting. 4 years, but what do they get? They get money laundering, they get some, stolen alcohol and some counterfeit cigarettes. 4 years, that's what they get. They run it on a state senator and his crony for 1 year, and they get international arm trafficking, they get drug smuggling, they get pay to play, and they get murder for hire.
Yeah.
I mean, so really, it seems like all of the excitement's in the Capitol.
Well, speaking of the Capitol, let's go back to this Capitol and talk to Scott Detrow. I mean, the 3 state lawmakers embroiled, 3 in 3 months, essentially. Is this a case of a few bad apples, or it says something bigger about the state of ethics in our state legislature?
I think it raises a lot of questions about ethics, and I think there's frustration from good government folks because there's not really a clear solution here. I mean, how do you address the fact that a lawmaker is allegedly trying to ship arms in from outside the country to get just a few $1,000s in campaign contributions? California already has pretty tight, compared to other states, campaign finance laws, ethics requirements, reporting requirements. So there's a question of what can you do to solve this problem? But, going back to those wiretaps, you have recordings of Leland Yee allegedly saying, hey, we have to be careful because the FBI just busted one of my colleagues for taking bribes. Little does he know that the FBI is listening in on that conversation as well. I think when you have the right case, it's about not living in the district, so you kind of have to separate that here. But when you have two different lawmakers simultaneously being so willing to take money in order to do official business, I think a lot of people are concerned about how many of those conversations are happening when the FBI isn't listening. And
you bring up an interesting point, because clearly Leland Yee had some idea of what the legal boundaries are in the conversations mentioned in that indictment. And Marisa, does this bring up a point about possible concerns about entrapment, in that a lot of these scenarios were fabricated by the FBI? Does it raise the issue of entrapment and make it more difficult for them to prove these charges in court?
Well, I think what you see if you read this large document is that they were very careful to make the charges around the senator specifically federal charges, in which the entrapment laws are slightly different. Under federal law, you can sort of nudge somebody towards things as long as it's something that they would have probably done otherwise. And so I think that the feds were very careful in the way that they presented this case against the senator. They also have multiple charges against him on the bribery front. Only one's on the arms trafficking. If you add them all up, it's up to 125 years possible prison time. I would be surprised if we saw this go to trial. I mean, I think that when you throw charges like that at somebody, there's probably a big incentive on both sides to cut a deal, and who knows what else they might want to hear from him.
We've heard a lot about Leland Yee, of course. We've heard a lot about Raymond Chow. We haven't heard quite as much about Keith Jackson. What do we know about him?
Well, as you said earlier, he was a former school board president here. Over the last 10, 15 years, he worked as a consultant on the Hunters Point Shipyard project, both, I think, directly for Lennar Corporation, but also through Sam Singer, a very well-known crisis communications expert. And he's really a bit of an enigma here. I mean, I've talked to people who said he's the nicest guy in the world. I can't believe this happened. We've talked to other people who said, he was always a little shady. But the fact that he got so deep into this sort of underworld, the feds allege that he was doing gun deals with his son, that they had sort of pushed saying, hey, if you need a hit taken out, we can help you facilitate that. Certainly, they're saying that he was selling drugs. So it really doesn't jive with his sort of public persona. Bribes might be one thing. I think when you go into murder for hire, we're in a whole nother realm.
And just real quickly, Nathan, are there other names in that indictment tied to the Chinatown gangs?
I mean, George Nye has been charged. He was a former leader in the Waching. I see it in some of the publications I've been reading now are saying he's still a current member of the Waching, and that wasn't my understanding. But my understanding was that he was a former leader in the Waching, arrested, and actually fled to Hong Kong or left to Hong Kong for a few years in the 90s.
Okay. And also more court appearances expected next week.
We'll see. Leland Yee will be in court on Monday for an arraignment, and everyone else, Shrimp Boy and Keith Jackson, were in court on Friday, and they were denied bail. So I think most of the other defendants will be back up in front of a judge next week.
Okay, much more to come.
Yeah.
Well, Scott Detrow in Sacramento, Marisa Lagos, and Nathan Halverson, thank you all for joining us. And a quick note on this, you will find all of KQED's coverage of this story at kqednews.org. When Susan Desmond-Hellmann was chosen 5 years ago as the first female chancellor in the history of UC San Francisco, she was in charge of drug development at the biotech company Genentech. UCSF is renowned for cutting-edge medical research, in addition to its various schools, including medicine, dentistry, and nursing. Desmond-Hellmann took over the $4 billion enterprise at a time of severe budget cuts. At the end of this month, she leaves UCSF to head up the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in Seattle. Chancellor Desmond-Hellmann sat down with Scott Shafer to talk about her UCSF tenure and her future.
Chancellor, welcome.
Thank you.
You came to UCSF from Genentech almost 5 years ago now. You took over at a time of budget cuts and tuition increases and layoffs. What was the toughest part about taking over at that time?
I felt as chancellor that first and foremost, we needed to bring, and I needed to bring, a sense of optimism and can-do spirit. We couldn't say, okay, stop teaching professional and graduate students, stop caring for patients, stop doing important research that's going to change the world.
You, of course, like many administrators, were under harsh criticism, none more so than from State Senator Leland Yee, who, of course, is in the news this week, being the subject himself of an FBI investigation and corruption. What was the toughest part, the most unfair part, do you think, of of the criticism, not just from him, but from others on the regents or in the state legislature, the governor for that matter?
A 23,000 person, $4 billion university does not run on its own gas. It needs leadership. It needs an administrative infrastructure to make things happen. And the best and brightest need to be compensated. I think a healthy debate on what should be the proper compensation for great leadership, I welcome a healthy debate.
But there's also some political grandstanding that goes on.
That's the most difficult for me. As a leader of an institution trying to maintain excellence and doggedly every day pushing for that excellence, the ability to hire people and pay them what they're worth is good for the state, good for the university, and shouldn't be the subject of pandering.
UCSF is in the future business. You're doing
Yes.
research and thinking about the future, solving problems for the future. But a couple years ago, you said that the financial model for UCSF was not sustainable and that the university was on a track to run out of or to go into the red in 2015. And you talked about changing the relationship between UCSF and the rest of the university system. What's the status of that?
What I told the regents was really fundamentally a couple things. One is that it was in all of our collective best interests as a public institution. So there was no part of this that was any wish to break away from being public or a part of the UC system.
This is not Crimea.
This is not Crimea, no. In fact, what I believe is that UCSF allowed to unleash its entrepreneurial spirit is at its finest, and that we needed to have a nimble governance so that we could make rapid decisions, change in two areas that are highly competitive, both our research enterprise, we compete for grants, and our clinical enterprise, we compete for patients.
We're in the midst of implementing healthcare reform in this country. Is there a chance that institutions like UCSF are going to really suffer because the whole model of fee-for-service, and that's really being squeezed a bit with healthcare reform, isn't it?
Our leadership anticipated that we would, no matter what happened with the Affordable Care Act, we would need to lower our prices, we would need to focus on access, and we would need to change the way we operate from that fee-for-service to looking at safety, quality, affordability. Very different for an academic medical center, but we need to do that while continuing to innovate, continuing to seek cures for diseases, and continuing to be leaders academically.
You know, we're in a new era with medicine with regard to genomics and genetics and privatized medicine and all of that. How is that going to change medicine going forward, do you think?
Well, one of the things I'm most excited about at UCSF is the concept of precision medicine. UCSF has been a leader in precision medicine.
What does that mean?
Precision medicine is a way of having all of what you mentioned, genomics, electronic health records, self-monitoring, the ability to use algorithms to seek information in data, what some people call big data, in whatever form it is. It may be an environmental exposure, family history, so it's not limited to your genes, but it is massive amounts of information about you being pooled with other information in a network of knowledge that can come back to your clinician to help care for you. So precision medicine should be more predictive, it should be more personalized, and it allows us to focus more on prevention, seeing what will happen to you before it happens.
You're leaving UCSF to become the CEO of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation up in Washington, and they focus on global health, among other things. And there's been some concern expressed recently about rich guys like Bill Gates or Larry Ellison or Eric Schmidt down at Google spending a lot of money, hundreds of millions of dollars on research and health issues that they find to be important, and that in some way that could undermine sort of science for the common good. Do you have any concerns about, or what do you think of that criticism? Maybe is a better way to ask it. I
am thrilled that Bill and Melinda Gates and Warren Buffett have decided to take their wealth and try and have all lives have equal value. I mean, that really resonates for me. I'm thrilled about that. Does that mean that no one should question or challenge the focus of the foundation or give input? Absolutely not.
Don't be afraid of the questions.
Don't be afraid of the questions, and don't be afraid of the dialogue. And I believe, and being in San Francisco, being in California, I think it's in our DNA to believe that healthy dialogue and debate brings better outcomes.
All right, Chancellor Susan Desmond-Hellmann, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Gentrification as interpreted by youth. That's the focus of a new work by the Push Dance Company as it explores the transformation of the Bayview Hunters Point neighborhood in San Francisco. Concerns about whether local residents will be priced out of their own neighborhood are brought to life in a unique performance that premieres this weekend, combining dance with poetry. The sights and sounds seem familiar. A room spills over with focused intensity as a dance troupe rehearses for its upcoming premiere. But there's nothing ordinary about this performance. It's called the Point Shipyard Project, and it's a genre-bending mix of poetry and dance created with the help of the 3rd Street Youth Center and Clinic.
We are collaborating in order to learn more about the toxic cleanup at the Bayview Hunters Point Naval Shipyard and how that will affect the youth at the center 10 years from now.
It was a place in the area where the land was passed down. This is where toxic and bombs were tested and contaminated land was found. It was never safe when the government came in. Caution.
The Bayview Hunters Point neighborhood is located in San Francisco's southeastern corner. It's one of the few areas in the city that has not yet been greatly affected by gentrification. But after nearly a century as a working shipyard neighborhood, inhabited predominantly by African Americans, that's starting to change. Bayview Hunters Point is in the midst of a radical transformation. The 3rd Street Light Rail project was finished in 2007. An $8 billion redevelopment program is in progress, and the Navy shipyard is undergoing a massive cleanup of toxins.
When I first brought the subject of gentrification to 3rd Street Youth Center and Clinic, the youth did not know about the cleanup at the shipyard. And there is going to be a whole new neighborhood and development along that area. And they wanted to know exactly how that would affect them.
This will no longer be the Hunters Point we've known our whole lives.
The longtime residents are facing a particularly complex problem. How do you support improvements to your neighborhood if they may ultimately result in the loss of your home? Simpson believes you start by helping people tell their stories.
My neighborhood filled with blacks. They say it's contaminated. They say it'll be crazy and touche. It'll be dark and the brightest days. But there's a reason for these violent ways. After examination, I found that discrimination, contamination.
Push is a dance company that focuses on social topics, and we usually look for stories that are untold or not really seen in the public eye. So it was very natural for us to reach out to youth and ask them, hey, can you please tell us your stories about what you think the naval shipyard will look like in 2024. And they actually came up with some really amazing things. Good, don't let the energy die here. Keep it up.
The youth poets recorded their monologues, establishing a roadmap for Simpson's next step, creating the choreography that would merge the spoken word with movement.
Right, if you're gonna do anger, like let it come through.
For Simpson, this melding of poetry and dance isn't simply a tool for social change, it's also a personal exploration.
This sound score is very important to the dancing because for me as a choreographer, there are parts where I take each word from the poem and make a movement specifically to that word.
So give me some examples of certain words and how you translate that into gestures for the dancers.
Well, for example, we have brain cells.
Oh, okay.
Contamination. Examination.
Sick. Dancer. Asthma. Shoot. White. Black. Break them down.
So this is the story about a young man named Sam Owens, and his poem is talking about the discrimination in his neighborhood and how the toxins affect his ability to think, go to school, read, and just learn.
The Point Shipyard project looked to the Museum of the African Diaspora for support during development, and it's the ideal venue for the performance.
This was another opportunity to look at African American culture and how we adapt and bring culture to new areas as well.
Simpson considers the piece to be part performance, part museum installation. It starts with the audience wandering through the space, interacting close up with the push dancers. By the end of the piece, the audience has been ushered into the top floor gallery to have a direct personal experience with the dancers and the words of the Bayview youth.
Do not wear hoodies. Do not wear your pants low. Do not wear do-rags, fitted caps, ski caps. Do not wear headgear or anything that's red and black or blue.
Toaster is one of the poets. He's seeing the piece for the first time.
Jerseys, scrubs, uniforms, suits are always fine as long as they can count the numbers on your back. Be a number. Do not be a statistic. No.
To watch it turn into something that like kind of explained how I feel walking down the street in most neighborhoods anyway, it was really comforting to watch other people feel the same way I did.
Funerals are fine. Funerals are always fine.
Like 7 people on stage feel and understand what I'm saying and then express it in that way. It was wonderful.
Push Dance Company is a young company, and we're also a part of the discussion when it comes to displacement and diaspora in San Francisco. The residents of Bayview Hunters Point are facing the question of whether or not they'll be priced out, and I think that in some ways we're kindred spirits in that artists are also being priced out.
For a century, this hard-working neighborhood has supported the Navy and other industries at great physical cost to the residents. But when the cleanup and redevelopment are complete, what will remain of the families, the artists, the community that built this neighborhood from the ground up?
I think what should happen for that area is that the residents of Bayview Hunters Point have a voice in how their neighborhood is being developed.
And earlier today, another dance event took place all around the Bay Area and the world. Professional dancers and dance fans took part in what's called Dance Anywhere, a simultaneous worldwide public art performance. To see some of those performances, go to kqed.org/arts. I'm Thuy Vu. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.